the kitchen table, featuring myself, Ari, and my mother, Lisa.
Hello.
So here we are, mother. We are just a couple of days from Christmas, and I wouldn't say things are feeling very festive at the moment. Would you?
No, I
No.
think no, definitely not feeling festive.
Although I guess the stress of the situation is kind of a Christmassy feeling, you could say.
It's the opposite of the stress of having to see your family.
Yeah, yeah.
The stress of not seeing your family.
It's terrible. I mean, all the people I've been speaking to, no matter where they are, it's such a blow because I think for many people this year has been more or less a write-off in terms of travel plans, whatever other plans they had going. And I think people were probably putting a lot on Christmas as the one time in the year where they could be sure they could take holiday, they could see their family, and now won't be able to do that either.
No, well, I mean, to me, it's just the worst aspect of it is people who will be spending Christmas alone, particularly older people. I mean, the effect on mental health is very significant. And of course, I mean, we're in a situation that, I mean, I've never been in my lifetime, and certainly someone your age has never been in, which is dealing with an actual illness, a disease, a virus that is in control of us. I mean, we essentially don't control it. We follow it, and it stays pretty well ahead of us, and or at least that's the way it seems. And I mean, there's one way of looking at it, which is that your government are incompetent. And I mean, surely the government that we have is, I mean, as far as competence is concerned, most of the competence and experience of the Tory party was dismissed when Boris Johnson took over from Theresa May because they were Remainers.
Mm-hmm.
But they had the experience and they had the knowledge, and whether or not you like Tories, and I mean, I don't particularly like Tory ideas, but I would prefer to have an experienced Tory in charge than this kind of maverick, assemblage of people who are appointed because of their devotion to the idea of leaving the European Union.
Yeah.
And, so is a perfect storm approaching this country? Yeah, I mean, I'd say we're in the middle of it. And the only thing, I mean, perhaps the only sort of sliver of silver lining is that maybe this terrible situation at the border is going to, with all the lorries being backed up and these poor drivers not being able to get home to whatever countries their families are waiting for them, to spend Christmas in a cab of a lorry. I mean, it's horrible. And maybe even Boris Johnson might look at this and say, gosh, is this what we're going to have for the first few months of 2021 and going forward?
So you think this might push him to make a deal then with Europe?
Well, I mean, I think it can't hurt. I mean, he may be so, I mean, it all comes down to what the real reason for Brexit, for the idea of, does he really, secretly want a no-deal Brexit? And I suspect, and people have been saying this for a couple of years, that the advantage of a no-deal Brexit for someone like Boris Johnson and his friends and the people in his government is that we can turn this into an island tax haven.
Yeah.
Singapore, that's what they always say. So, and understandably, the European Union doesn't want a Wild West sort of, slave labor, low tax regime on its border. And nobody in Britain, I mean, no actual person in Britain who isn't a billionaire wants to see that happening either. People who are in the sector of business that is not kind of a mega transnational corporation that's just there to beat taxes wants to live in an environment like that. It doesn't even actually suit most businesses.
Yeah.
But the Tory party donors are all from a very, very, very elite, super wealthy class, which didn't used to exist in this country or in any country for that matter.
So then you're saying, so if Boris Johnson gets the no deal Brexit, then he will be able to loosen regulations in the UK, which would then benefit the business. Okay.
Yeah, well, Europe is trying to keep the UK to standards that would not create an uneven playing field, which would mean that Europe would have standards that Britain does not. It's very much like when they complained about the Irish tax regime, where Ireland was attracting businesses somehow unfairly by giving them very low tax rates.
Yeah, which they do. I mean, almost every business is either incorporated in either Ireland or the Netherlands.
Exactly. So, I mean, and they don't want Britain to become, and also don't forget, we're the center of the financial industry, and the financial industry is the greatest offender in all senses of this sort of phase of capitalism that we're living through now.
But isn't the EU protected against that? I mean, so the problem with Ireland and the Netherlands is that they're in the EU. So basically people set up in, Aldi, for example, is based in Ireland. They set up in Ireland for tax purposes, even Amazon, all the big companies, basically.
Apple.
And then they trade freely within the European Union. But Britain would then become a country not unlike, for example, I don't know, Algeria. I mean, like a country outside of the European Union. So it wouldn't be the case that Britain would be competing on the same playing field as Europe, because Europe has its own free trade zone, its own union, and Britain would be outside it. So Britain would be like America. So even though it's geographically closer, I don't see that there'd be any direct competition there. You see what I mean?
Well, there's always I mean, one of the reasons why you have a problem with tax havens is because they do exist and they prevent other countries with sort of normal tax regimes or any effort at all to tax wealthy people or corporations. They prevent those laws from being put into place because people, like, what's the argument? They'll go somewhere else. Yeah. If that somewhere else is Britain, and not only that, but there are standards. I mean, there are standards for products and things. I mean, that Britain, being sort of between an EU country and actually being on a landmass with an EU country, and this idea with the border and things coming in through North, it's going to be very, very difficult. But I do think that the financial industry being located here, whatever Britain imposes upon those banks and things is going to be the rule for them, and they can just stay in Britain. Now, you're right. But the EU isn't going to be able to cut off the financial industry, I don't think. I don't think that I don't think that there's going to be a possibility of, I mean, believe me, I hope there will be a possibility of Europe imposing, for instance, the transaction tax that they were talking about after 2008. But so far that hasn't been successful, even with Britain in the EU.
But that might
often Britain is the country that argues against all these things. But I mean, I wish that there were ways of, I mean, with globalization never seems to work for anybody but the wealthy. I mean, how come we can't globalize the tax laws, but we can globalize the corporations? It's only for people who, the wealthy get wealthier. I mean, essentially, CEOs aren't in a global workforce where they're competing with the lowest paid people in the world, but every worker is. Yeah. It's one rule for them, one rule for everybody else. So Britain, I mean, I can understand why Europe doesn't want to have this kind of country on its border that doesn't have to play by the same rules at all. I mean, look at France. They call London some like little Paris or something, because so many people from France, people who worked mostly in finance, decided that the rules were too stringent in France. It wasn't when I say competitive, I mean it wasn't unregulated enough for them, the labor market and the companies. It wasn't unregulated. So all of them come to Britain, they make a fortune, and they don't have to pay their taxes.
Yeah,
I mean, and this is the kind of thing that Britain will attract. They will start siphoning off a large part of the population, and that's only in one sense, siphoning off a large part of the population of countries where they think they can make more money here and have fewer rules. And I understand why the EU doesn't want that, because it makes it very hard to have standards.
Living in the UK, as we do, is it not great for us? I mean, this is a different line of argument, just to say countries like Singapore and Switzerland are considered to have very high standards of living. Won't that be the same in the UK once we've got rid of all the regulation? Then we can have a very wealthy, very high standard of living like Singapore and Switzerland, for example.
Well, I mean, I have to say, I don't actually know enough about Singapore at all. And even Switzerland, I mean, to me, there doesn't seem to be a huge level of poverty in Switzerland. I think it feels to me like this is a different sort of country. I think some of the things that, so I couldn't really comment upon whether or not it would make us like Switzerland or Singapore, how actually ordinary people live in those countries. I don't feel that there are many ordinary people in Switzerland, by what I would say the kind of workers we have in Britain or in London.
And I guess there must be some.
There must be some.
They must be paid a high wage.
Well, somehow, yeah, they paid a higher wage, or somehow they have social programs that work better than the ones we do, because don't forget, we don't have that. But we also don't have that. I don't think they have the level of food banks and poverty, and I don't know. But and I actually don't know how they do it. But I don't think that would come here. I don't think that's the plan, because part of the plan is also, like I said before, one of the greatest reasons for workers in countries like Britain to lose their standard of living is because manufacturing gets done in lower wage economies. Now, I'm not saying that Britain can go down to the level of China. I don't think that's going to happen. But what I would say is that, and I'm sure that Europe is concerned about that Britain could make a less regulated, more attractive market for businesses to pay workers less. And all that would accomplish, yes, it would be great for very wealthy people, but all it would accomplish, as you see in the United States, is a wider gap between the poor and the wealthy. I mean, just this morning I was talking to someone who said, London, who'd want to live in London? If you hadn't been here all your life, who would want to live in London? Because all it is become a gated community for the very well-to-do, for those who have, he said, and the rest, get poorer. And I think that's essentially the way it's going. And I think any no-deal Brexit would lead us to a more exaggerated form of that. I don't think it's going to bring the prosperity to most of the people in the country. And in addition, it would also let in things like American healthcare companies, which are already, according to John Pilger's report, have already set up offices, lobbying offices in Westminster, and are ready to privatize the health service, which is the last thing we have.
Yeah.
As badly as it works, it's still free. And that is something that we may not have after a while if we leave the EU without a deal.
Do you think Johnson will want to make more deals with the likes of the United States?
Yeah.
And others?
I think the only problem, some people said, and I think it's probably true, that since his friend Trump is out, it might not be as easy to get a deal. But at the same time, it's not really the president that controls that. There's a whole infrastructure of negotiators like trade negotiators in America, like USAID and organizations that kind of are ready. They're kind of the spearhead of American. America has so much experience in sort of economically invading countries and what they call opening it up to business, what they call liberalization or democratization, outrageously enough.
Even.
So